I recommend that you start with this book, but once you're a chapter in, you should move over to this book and then take that for a few pages, add in this one by Gabor Mate, and when you go to the bathroom, take this one and sit on the toilet and read this as well. My ideal strategy for you is to read all 4 books at once. I mean, literally 1 page at a time, because that's how you're going to get the most out of this. And if you ever get bored, then feel free to just throw them over your shoulder and discard all of them because they're not even worth paying attention to. This is dreadful advice, awful advice, and yet the advice that I see around healing ADHD or any kind of attention focus issue is focusing on the symptoms rather than the larger issue at hand. Not only is it worthless for me to recommend those 4 books, which are actually useful for anyone who's trying to heal their focus, it's worthless for me to recommend in that way because someone who's got that scattered focus pattern will see all 4 books, buy all 4 books, and then dip in, dip out without a reason to continue all the way to the end on one book because the reason beyond the book does not exist. And that's the key idea that we're going to explore in today's video on attention deficit. We're not looking at your inability to focus on a book for more than 5 minutes. We're not looking on the scattered attention or maybe the manic inflations of being absorbed by something for a few hours, although we're going to take into that. We're going to stretch all the way out towards a deeper question, which is why bother paying attention to anything. There's a deep wounding at the center of the child within who does not have a reason to pay attention to anything which is boring, unworthy, or otherwise lacking a reason to engage. And we typically learn this at school, and we typically reinforce it with our parents. So we're going to go all the way back to the inner child. We're going to take the existentialist philosophy approach into the future, and we're going to frame today's question from Miles as our background. So Miles asked, please do a video on ADHD, regulating mood, attention, and sleep being the worst for him, because it makes inner work very hard with regular slips back into old patterns and negative spirals and a challenging daytime fatigue and nighttime insomnia dynamic. Big love to you and these amazing videos. Thank you, my brother. Although I am going to answer your question, it's interesting to look at this pattern right now that this is all contained within a day, right? We're seeing this idea of regulating mood, regulating attention, and the sleep, the daytime fatigue, and the nighttime insomnia. Miles is caught, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but Miles is caught in focusing on the day, maybe the week, month, maybe not so much, the season, the year, the 5 years, the 10 years, it doesn't matter. You're focused on the issues of the day. And if the day feels like it's slipping away from you, you haven't got the stability or the grounding or really the capacity to actually extend into the future and have a reason to organize the day. Because if you strip back any kind of bedtime rebellion behavior of staying way too late on your phone and consuming media or just generally not committing through on any given activity, there's 2 possible issues, which I believe to be the foundational issues of anyone who's struggling with attention disorder. It's, why should I pay attention to this? And how should I pay attention to this? Those are the 2 ideas. And it brought to my mind as I was preparing this video, this wonderful book by Ian McGilchrist called Ways of Attending. If you recognize the name, it's because he also wrote The Master and His Emissary. And to play with the language of attention, what does it mean to pay attention? McGilchrist would argue that when you look at the divided brain, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, we have even ways of paying attention which are baked into us. Left is more linear, compartmentalized, more objectively scientifically oriented, to overly simplify, and the right is more holistic, more emotion-laden. Of course, there's real complexities as you get down into the nuts and bolts of brain science, but we don't need to do that for this video. We need to pay attention to this idea of attending. Why pay attention? That's the simple idea. Why should you bother to regulate your mood if you don't have anything that's worth regulating your mood for? Why bother to fix your sleep if you have nothing that you want to wake up for? There's an interesting territory that opens up there that's almost connected with depressive disorder because there's a hidden link which often isn't picked up. And I know this firsthand because Throughout my school years from 11 to 16, I didn't get diagnosed with ADHD. I didn't get diagnosed with anything because the attention wasn't there in terms of classroom management. It wasn't the best school. And yet somehow the teachers didn't notice that at the back of the classroom, almost every single lesson, there was a guy who was doing this. And I would try and sleep throughout all of my lessons. I was so fundamentally bored. I loathed those 5 years of high school. Hated it. College was better from 16 to 18, more intellectually stimulating, but I didn't want to pay attention, so I disconnected. The reason why I didn't get picked up in my sleepy state is because I wasn't disruptive to the other 30 students, whereas the child who has more energetic potential, his lack of attention combined with the energy which is all inside of him or her, that goes out into, the more disruptive child pattern, which typically gets picked up around age 5 or 6. What's happening there is that the teacher, and this is just how the diagnosis prescription model works, the teacher who's running the class has 20 to 30 students, children in this case, 20 to 30 children that she or he needs to guide through a lesson plan multiple times per day. So what do? They have to make sure that everyone is more or less contained and more or less focused on the work. So if the student is kind of sat there like this looking out into the void, he's not going to get the attention of, oh, there might be something wrong. Maybe the teacher will come around and say, hey, is everything okay? Because her attention in that moment is on the other 2 kids that have got up and started wrestling on the floor, because they're the ones who have the hyperactivity, and of course they're the ones that then get sent to the headmaster's office and told to sit down and shut up. But if you really strip it back, both the child who's gazing out the window or doodling on the piece of paper or otherwise antsy, kind of leaning back on the chair, like the spectrum opens up from complete dissociation and depression to swinging on the chair to throwing a paper ball to literally getting up to running around and breaking a window. There's a spectrum of not paying attention, but at both ends it's the same not paying attention extreme. Completely depressed or completely over-energized, both children are not paying attention. One doesn't get picked up, the other gets very picked up, and from that point going forwards, the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old is perceptually locked into a category of ADHD and attention deficit disorder. But maybe they had very good reasons to not pay attention, and maybe we've been conditioned into classroom environments which don't honor the intelligence of our body. That's a whole nother video. The reason I went down on that little spiral there is to bring forwards this idea of paying attention and how you need a reason to pay attention, because that same child who's either depressed at the desk or overacting and over-exaggerating their rebellion towards wanting to sit down, the reason they're doing that is because they do not have a reason to attend to the situation. They don't have a compelling drive or fascination with whatever's happening. And you know this in your own story, because if you do struggle with attention deficit issues, doesn't mean you have to go with a label. If you do struggle with that way of relating to the world, you've also had moments where you've been completely fixated and utterly fascinated on a sport, on a creative pursuit, on a certain type of media or entertainment, or maybe, if you want to think about it, a certain person in a romantic engagement. I can imagine, let's go with a spicy example, shall we? Someone who has an attention issue may struggle to sit down and do their emails, may struggle to remember to go and eat at regular times, may struggle to regulate themselves in the evening when it's time for bed and, oh no, it's 4 a.m. again, I've just been scrolling for 3 hours because I got locked in that loop. But when it comes to date night, and there's someone who's absolutely fascinating and very exciting to be around, I imagine that laser beam focus, that excitement and energy and all of that natural passion that's inside of you, that gets a place to express, therefore it is easy to pay attention. Of course, if they're boring and dull, not very good at conversation, or maybe not your type, there's a bit of a challenge with it. But the principle is the same. When you have a reason to pay attention, or there's a natural avenue of attention giving which fits your character and your temperament, It's not a challenge. So what's happening? Well, if we strip it all back and then take it forwards, we've got the situation where children who are given diagnoses of ADHD or attention deficit disorder are basically locked into a certain perceptual category of always being that way for life. So if we can strip that away, at least temporarily for this video, of course, I'm not a medical professional, treat this as existential, possible avenues of philosophical exploration. Also use your own brain and decide for yourself. If you take a child like that, extend them 20 years into the future or even 30 years into the future, they've been so heavily conditioned into this idea that they can't pay attention or that they struggle with attention or that they can't focus, that it's very difficult to dissolve that narrative. But the way to dissolve the fundamental, cruel almost, I would say it's almost cruel to give that to a child and let them hold on to that idea that they're kind of broken and they don't work because they don't work in the system. I'm angry about it. It's cruel. We can drop that narrative nonetheless by going to the deeper issue of why bother paying attention to anything. This is why I held up Viktor Frankl at the start. Feel free to go back to the start of the video and look at those 4 books. I do recommend that you genuinely read them. The book I held up today was The Will to Meaning, and it was more of a therapeutic take on Viktor Frankl's existential theories, because you need to really strip back to the center of your identity and have a meaning in life to be willing to pay attention to the small compartments of life. Let's give a practical example. The woman who dances, she struggles with focus. She's got attention deficit-like systems, but when she dances, she is in the flow and she can dance for 3 hours. If she knows what that feels like on a daily basis, and if she has a lifestyle that's conducive to always being a dancer, and that's who she is, it's a lot easier to go through those little blips of focus where you're struggling to do the admin on the laptop so you can get to the dancing. You're struggling to do other elements of life organization, again, so you can get to the dancing. But if you can frame it within the context of, I do this and therefore paying attention is rewarded with me attending to my lifestyle as a dancer, it becomes easier and easier. And of course, there's a whole video I could make about practical boundaries of turn off your phone, don't go on the laptop, make sure that you're limiting yourself in regards to where you spend your energy. But the deeper principle is you need to frame every daily compartment of your life within the wider context of who you're becoming through that process. The day does not make sense if it's chaotic and dysregulated. Miles today in his question, he said about this pattern of irritability and insomnia and fatigue in the day. If he's just focusing on the 1 day, 24-hour cycle, that isn't situated in the wider vision of who he's going to become over the next 50 years. You may say that's completely irrelevant, but I would argue it's the most relevant question of all. If you don't have a genuine pathway that you're attending to, you're going to get really frustrated that you're dealing with just the same day over and over and over again because you don't see the possibility of where the healing could take you. You need to have a path for your attention stretching forwards into the future. And I would argue that this needs to be at least a 1-year goal, but a genuinely meaningful 1-year goal, not you picking out of the hat, I'm going to go do my master's degree in X, Y, or Z, or, oh, I'll try out this new hobby, and then you obviously buy the guitar and put it down a week later. It needs to be a deeper existential answer to the question of why bother paying attention to anything. And that's my advice for how to supposedly cure, heal, or begin to heal those attention deficit-like systems. It's so heavily condensed into someone who tries to heal this in their 20s, 30s, or 40s that you need an alternative approach. I'm trying to break through the noise. There are so many videos you could watch. If you've already stayed on this video all the way to this point, you've clearly got the capacity to pay attention. So that's not the real question. The question is, where does that take you? Once more, go back to start the video. You can read the 4 books, but it's worthless reading the 4 books if they're not put into the context of where that will take you. And if you want to go all the way down to the core of the inner work as related to this question of attention, maybe resolve the self-wounds and the self-esteem issues that would indicate that you're not worth paying attention to. Because usually, in terms of the wounding of the child, There are certain moments, sad to say, there are certain moments for the 3-year-old inside of us where we wanted the attention of our mother or our father because something was hurting. Something was off, and we didn't get the attention. There was something that happened when we were 10, when we got something really embarrassing, something that was really shameful, something that was so important for us to share, and we tried to share it, and it wasn't given the attention. That's where we start to get the disorder of not being given the attention that we then refuse to give to the outside world. It's almost as if we might have a rebellious inner child that says, well, you didn't give me any attention, so I'm not going to give you any attention. There's part of that. It's not the full story. You're not just the inner child. You haven't been possessed by the 10-year-old within, but there's elements of that I see when doing mentorships with people who struggle with attention, and it usually goes back to that theme. If you're already kind of connecting the dots of, oh yeah, I wasn't given the attention that I needed, and that's why I'm basically stuck in this rebellious arc of not giving attention to my job, not giving attention to my health and fitness, and you're then perpetuating the child abuse, right? You're perpetuating the child abuse of not giving yourself enough attention and enough love to actually consider where you'd like to go with your whole life, to consider how beautiful life could be, to put attention to where you could go. And if you want to do that, it's well worth doing because you deserve the attention that you weren't given, and you deserve to see the possibility of who you could be with all of that attention and all of that energy, like a wonderful white, pinkish kind of like energy flow pouring into you, charging you up. The desaturated landscape within starts to become more colorful because that kind of pipe of attention is feeding back in. If it's not going to go out there because you don't think it's worth paying attention to the nonsense of the everyday world, and you know it's not working when you're spending time scrolling on your phone, find a way to give yourself attention that would actually be meaningful. Find yourself a way to get love from yourself and from your environment in a way which is nourishing. And you get much closer to the core of the attention wound. You don't need the label, you don't need the pills, you don't need the prescription. You need love. And you can start giving yourself that love, and you can start acting on that love towards the future of your own making by doing the things that will get you into more of a position where you genuinely love yourself on a daily basis, and your actions line up with that love that becomes a real, moral, integrity-based value. It's the end of the video. Thank you for watching. You can read the books I held up at the start, or you can just turn off YouTube, reflect on what you want with your life, and give it a little bit of attention, because it's the most useful place to put your attention. I'll see you over on the next video, right over here. Thank you for your attention.